But here's a question for you. Did the United States land on the moon? Seems like an easy thing to prove, right? And yet the former head of Russia's space agency and certain Russian academics can't seem to find any evidence at all that the United States actually landed on the moon. Here's the guy by the name of Dmitry Rogozin, and he worked at Russia's version of NASA. Not only did he work there, he ran it. Well, he just posted something on his Telegram channel, and I've gotten the translated version of it. And he says he admitted that about 10 years ago, while he was the head of the agency, he went on a bit of a spirit quest. I'm going to quote him now. This is Dmitry. About 10 years ago, when I worked in government, I sent an official request to the Roscosmos, which is their version of NASA, to provide me with documentary evidence of the Americans' stay on the moon. They were there for days, right? Which at the time was still at the disposal of the federal agency, he says. He continues, I was painfully embarrassed by the fact that the Soviet cosmonauts returning from multi-day expeditions could barely stand on their feet and underwent a long recovery after such flights. And the Americans crawled out of their lunar ships like cucumbers from the garden, he says. He kept pushing his government, give me the evidence that the Americans landed on the moon. And finally, he got a response from a Russian cosmonaut who basically told him to go pound sand for even asking the question. And he sent him a book called Conquest of the Moon with a comment written by the cosmonaut Leonov that he said the Americans were there because they told him themselves that they were there. That's literally the only evidence he received.
Why has nobody been to the moon in such a long time?
That's not an 8-year-old's question. That's my question. I want to know, but I think I know. Because we didn't go there, and that's the way it happened. And if it didn't happen, it's nice to know why it didn't happen, so in the future, if we want to keep doing something, we need to know why something stopped in the past that we wanted to keep it going.
So this guy, the former head of the space agency, didn't give up. He says he continued to search for this evidence, but he found nothing. The only thing he got was anger from within his own space agency because of the relationship with NASA. They had a good relationship with NASA. And they didn't want it to be compromised. They told him to drop it, basically, and that he would, quote, aggravate an international situation. So shut up. Don't ask questions. But he didn't stop there. He then started asking Russian academics about it, who were in the know, and they all but stonewalled him. We know this is true because in November 2018, academic E.B. Elektronov from the Russian Academy of Sciences gave a really weird interview on Russian radio called Moscow Speaks radio show. And he admitted that, yes, Dmitry did ask him for evidence that the Americans had landed on the moon. So he confirmed the story. And he was put off by the question he described in the interview. And he admits this on radio. There he is. That was the academic who was put off by this. That how dare you ask me this question? And he said basically he was asked, Dmitry then confirmed, he wanted him to show him the landing sites. Because clearly, you're part of this. You're an academic who worked at the agency. You know where these landing sites are. And he said he wouldn't look. He wouldn't look. And the reason he wouldn't look, according to this author, that they would find virginal sites. Nothing there. No evidence that the Americans had landed in those sites at all. If they examined them, there wouldn't be debris. There wouldn't be boxes left over. There wouldn't be a rover that they left behind. The American flag, they would be able to find this stuff easily. But he said he was told, no, don't ask questions. Stop asking questions.
The only time I ever saw them actually studying normal ice was when a film crew from National Geographic came by. The rest of the time, which was most of the time, the scientists were studying something they called sky ice. This stuff was totally different. We were never allowed to go into the laboratory areas of the station because the labs had to be kept super clean, and they said it would mess up their work if they risked letting too many people in the lab. But one time, one of the researchers that I was friends with showed me a piece of sky ice. You couldn't touch the stuff with your bare hands because it was so cold. And it wasn't clear or white like normal ice. It was solid blue. He said that's why they call it sky ice, because it was the exact same color as the sky. We had to wear thick, heavy going outside gloves to handle it. The stuff was so cold, it would instantly freeze your skin if you touched it. I don't remember what the temperature he said it was, but it was something like hundreds of degrees below zero, way colder than the normal ice that was outside. He had to carry it in a metal bottle that was kind of like a thermos. He let me play with the piece of it for a while. It felt lighter than a piece of normal ice of the same size, like it wasn't very heavy at all. It almost felt like you could throw it up in the air and it would just float back down. But I didn't try that. And it was also a little flexible when I tried to bend it. It didn't break like normal ice would, and even for a small piece, you could see through it. It was solid blue right from the surface. And here's the really weird part. It didn't melt into water. When it got warm, because we had it inside, it just started to shrink. It got smaller and smaller, but my glove never got wet. And there was no water on the floor. The stuff just turned into thin air when it got warm and vaporized. Russian scientists had discovered the same problem when they tried to take the ice back to Russia. So that was why they all had research stations in Antarctica. So I really thought it was cool to see something I'd never heard of before. The whole time I was at McMurdo, I heard people talking about the wall like that was a special place. It's pretty common to find ice walls and ice cliffs all over Antarctica. The whole place is ice, but it's all just normal white or clear ice. So I asked my friend where they get the sky ice from, and he said it comes from the wall. I don't remember exactly how he described it, but apparently there's a huge wall of sky ice in Antarctica. He said it was hundreds of miles inland from the coast. I never got to see it myself because I was only stationed to McMurdo. I didn't get to go out on expeditions. He said it was the biggest natural structure in the world. Imagine that. He said that in the 1960s, the U.S. Army had a plan to bore a tunnel into the wall, but they didn't have a boring machine that could handle the super cold temperatures, so they had a whole testing project in Greenland where they developed ice tunnels and invented new boring machines that could operate in super cold temperatures. Once they had the new boring machine figured out, they brought it to the ice wall, or to the wall in Antarctica. He said that the machine bored a tunnel. I don't remember exactly, it was like 5 or 10 miles into the wall, but that they never broke through the other side of the wall, and that they still don't know how thick the wall is even to this day. He said that at first the floor of the tunnel was solid rock, but after a mile or two in, the floor was sky ice, like it was sky ice underneath after a certain point, or something like that. And apparently the wall slowly builds itself back up. So it slowly builds itself back up after you cut it, because after a year or so, the tunnel had shrunk smaller all by itself, like a self-healing wound. It starts closing up. They had to leave the boring machine inside the wall because the tunnel shrunk too small to get it back out. And after a few decades, the tunnel was completely gone. Like the part of the wall was solid again. It was really weird stuff, but I didn't think it was a big deal at the time. But then a few weeks ago, I saw a map of the wall in Antarctica, except the map was all flat and crazy looking, and it showed the wall going all the way up over the whole Earth. We know that the firmament's not just made out of ice. It's something special. That could just be something near the foundation to prevent you from going all the way to it. The Father's design is very complex, and he has foreknowledge. He knows what mankind's going to try to do. Those little nuclear bombs they shot at the firmament was nothing to the firmament. They can't break it. They've tried. If they could, they would, but they can't.